Hey guys, Stephen Cox here, and today we're going to be talking about how to use chord inversions to make your bass lines more interesting. So if you like videos like these, please hit subscribe below and consider becoming a patron. So before we talk about inversions, we really need to talk about chords. And today we're just going to be talking about simple three-note chords like C major, D minor, E major, those kinds of chords. Just major and minor chords today. We're not going to worry about diminished or augmented. First of all, we need to know how we find the notes in each chord. So let's say we're playing a C major chord. Well, a C major chord comes from the C major scale. And basically, anytime that we have a chord, we're going to use the scale that has the same name as the chord to find the notes within it. So a chord has a root, a third, and a fifth, and these get their names from the scale. So if it's a C major chord, a C major scale, the root will be the first note of the scale, which of course is a C. Then if we were to play all the notes, we've got C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C of the C major scale. But the chord is going to be the root, the third, and the fifth. So when the root is the first note of the scale, our third will be the third note of the scale, C, D, E. And our fifth will be the fifth note of the scale, C, D, E, F, G. So if we were playing the notes of a C major chord, they would be C, E, and G. And a chordal instrument will play those all at the same time, and we won't, usually. So when we're playing our bass lines, a lot of times we're either playing root fifth bass lines, meaning if we were playing a C major chord, we'd play the root and then the fifth. But for now, we're just going to talk about simpler lines where we're just playing the root. Normally, that's what we do. We play the root of the chord on the downbeat of the measure, and that's it. But what we could do to make it a little bit more interesting so that every single note that we're playing is not just lining up with the root of every chord that's being played on the other instruments, is that we could invert the chords, which means playing the third or the fifth instead of playing the root. So we don't want to do this all the time, because if you're always doing this, then it doesn't really stabilize the song. Normally we're there being the bass, and we're really strengthening the groove of the song, and we're doing that by hitting the roots of each chord so that everybody knows what the chord is. So that's the importance of us playing the root. But occasionally we can get away with inverting the chord, which means putting one of those other notes in the bass. We might want to do this to create a melody in the bass line. We could also use this to lead into certain chords. So let's talk about that first instance, which is really kind of a case of both. But in Ed Sheeran's song, Thinking Out Loud, he uses this in the guitar part, and the bass kind of follows the guitar part. So he could be playing a D chord twice, followed by a G chord and an A chord, in which case we would just be playing D, D, G, A. Now, instead of doing that, he plays a D for the first one, and then the second time that we play the chord, we're going to do an inversion where we put the F sharp in the bass, and in a D major scale, that F sharp is the third. So if we put the third in the bass of a chord, meaning if F sharp is the bass note while the guitar player or ukulele player or whoever is playing a D chord, then we're putting that chord in first inversion. And that means that we, as bass players, usually are playing the lowest note. The lowest note of the chord determines what inversion it's in. So this is called first inversion, but you might see it on a guitar lead sheet or a lyric sheet with the chords written above as D/F sharp. You could also have second inversion, which would be D/A, which we'll get into later. But for now, D/F sharp means a D chord with an F sharp in the bass. So think of it like a fraction. The F sharp is on the bottom, we're the bass. Now the bass line would change. Instead of being two Ds, a G, and an A, it would be D, F sharp, G, A, and it would sound like this. D, F sharp, G, So now let's hear that in context with a ukulele playing along. So let's do another example of this same idea using first inversions. But we're going to take this one to Canon. And normally we play Canon in D major, but since we just did that song in D major, I'd like to do Canon in C. So if we were just to play all of the notes root position, we'd end up with C, G, and these are all just the chord names too. C major, G major, A minor, so we just play an A, E minor, then F, then C, then F, and then G. So once again, that was C major, G major, A minor, E minor, F major, C major, F major, and G major. Now, instead of playing only roots, we can kind of go back and forth between a root note version and a first inversion chord. So if we were doing that, the C major, we'd play a C for it and leave that in root position. Then for the G major chord, rather than playing a G, we can play the third of the chord, G, A, B. If we use the G major scale to figure out what the third note is, that would be a B note. So far in our song, we have C, then going to B, which is a G over B chord. So that's a G chord in first inversion. Then we've got our A minor next. We're just going to do that in root position, so we're just going to play an A note, second fret on the G string. Then we have an E minor chord after that, but instead of playing an E, we could play up the E minor scale. And the third note of that E minor scale is going to be a G note. So if we put that E minor in first inversion, we have a G there. So let me play the first few notes of this up to that point. C, then we have a G over B, then we have an A, then we have an E minor over G. So we play the second note. When I say over, we play the note after I say over for those chords. Then we have an F major chord. We're just going to play an F there. I'm using third fret on the D string. And as you notice, these notes sound kind of familiar, and I'll explain why in a second. Then we're going to go to a C major chord, but instead of playing C, we're going to put an E in the bass. That's the third note of the C major scale. Okay, so that's a C over E. And after that C over E, we have an F. And we're just going to do these in root position from here on out. And then a G chord. So what I like about this bass line is it literally just goes down the C major scale. So that's kind of cool. So basically we're using these inversions to create a very melodic movement, which you can't really get much more melodic than just going down a major scale. So instead of having these giant skips between notes, like from C jumping way up to G, jumping up to A, that's not really that far, but jumping from A down to E is a pretty big jump. Instead, we can just do stepwise motion, which means just from one letter in the alphabet to another letter in the alphabet without skipping over them. So if we were going backwards, okay, so that's kind of confusing because our musical alphabet ends on G and starts back over at A. So when we get to that point, that part might be confusing. But we have C, B, A, and then at the end of our alphabet, we'd have G, and then right in front of G is F, and then E. So literally, we were just walking down the alphabet on the bass. That is kind of the advantage of using inversions to create melodies, is you can get a lot of stepwise motion like that, and things will lead into each chord a little smoother. So that's one way we can use our inversions. So another way we can use our inversions is a really common thing. Like if you think about country bass lines, you're playing a root and a fifth. We could technically think of when you're playing the fifth that you're putting the chord in second inversion, which means our fifth is in the bass instead of our third. So a C over G is a second inversion chord because of our C major scale. G is our fifth note. So we could use that in our country lines, sort of, although no one really thinks about it like this because it passes by so quickly. But when we play the G, the chord is still a C chord, so that means our G is in our bass temporarily. Now, another way to use this is to create common tones between chords. So that means we could stay on the same note even though the chord has changed. So here's a brief little example. Let's say our chord progression is a C chord going to a G chord, right? And then from the G chord we go back to the C chord, and then we go somewhere else. Okay? Well, what if we, instead of playing C, we put that chord in second inversion and played a G underneath it? Okay? And then when we went to the G chord, we played the G in root position, staying on that G on the bass line. And then when we went back to C, we could still stay on the G, and then from there move on to whatever chord we're going to. So if it goes to an F after that, we could just go to an F. So I'm going to try to play it to where you can hear the chord with that note in the bass. So I'm going to play my C chord up here with the G in the bass. So we've got a C chord with the G in the bass. Then we're going to have a G chord in root position. Then back to C chord with the G in the bass. And then we could go to an F chord. So that's another thing we could do, is we could create pedal tones by using a common note that's in all of the chords. That puts that C major chord in second inversion by having the G in the bass, and then the G is in root position, so we're able to stay on the G. And if we go back and forth between those two chords, that's a cool effect that you can get out of that, and we call that a pedal tone. So there are a lot more uses of inversions, but those are the main ones I wanted to go over today. So I'll try to elaborate more on this maybe in my live stream on Thursday. So if you're interested in hearing more examples of inversions being used to spice up your bass lines, then hang out with me on Thursday and we can go into that. But subscribe for more for now. If you like this video, please hit the like button below, and I will see you guys next time.